Hi, and welcome to another episode of About the Authors TV. I'm your host, Jake Brown. Julia Kelly deftly balances intrigue with mystery and historical detail. Kirkus Reviews has written of her historical hits like The Light Over London, or the Washington Book Review found a heartbreaking romance that'll grip you from the very beginning. Kelly weaves a tender romantic story around a girl who fights war, showing how strong even tender romantic women can be. With a little bit of mystery in the story, even mystery readers will like it. And others like The Last Dance of the Debutante, The Last Garden in England, The Whispers of War were all about romance concluded upon first read, that this really is the kind of story that transports its readers into another place and time, allowing us to leave our real lives behind for a few hours. I loved every moment I spent in the world Miss Kelly has created. Women's World hailed The Lost English Girl as a sweeping and beautifully written novel, and she's received equal praise for earlier works with the Governess series over the course of The Governess Was Wicked, The Governess Was Wanton, and The Governess Was Wild, and the Ticket to Love series with Seduction in the Snow, The Wedding Week and Kiss Me at Midnight. The standalone novel Change the Play. The One Week in Love series co-written with Audra North over 1 Week in Wyoming, 1 Week in Hawaii, and 1 Week in December. And the Matchmaker of Edinburgh series, featuring the look of love, the taste of temptation, and the allure of attraction. And she's here today to talk about it all. Julia, welcome to the show. AllAboutRomance.com would rave of The Whispers of War, that this is really the kind of story that transports its reader into another place and time, allowing us to leave our real lives behind for a few hours. I loved every moment I spent in the world Miss Kelly created. Do you enjoy being able to create that experience and escape for the reader? Even as you're working with such a dark time as 1939 Britain, with World War II ramping up, and threatening to rip characters like Nora, Hazel, and Marie's friendships and lives apart.
That book's actually a bit of a tricky one to talk about because I rewrote that book several times. I just couldn't get it right. And so, talk about a book where sometimes you just need to break it down into its component parts. I restructured it twice, I think. I, moved everything around. But the one thing that I knew I wanted to do was really make this kind of secret something that I held on to for as long as possible. So in every rewrite and every restructure, trying to catch those moments and make sure that I wasn't giving too much away as I was moving things around, because literally like entire sections got swapped. And I wrote the book in, 3 different perspectives, focusing on a single character each time. And so if you move, for instance, Marie and Hazel, you're going to completely change the order of events and what gets revealed when. So that was a bit of a tricky one, but one that I'm proud of because it was hard.
It sounds like a chess game you eventually won. Now there's a wonderful diary that helps tell the story within The Light Over London, where Apple Books promised as a consequence that readers who adore a richly detailed period piece will be immediately drawn in by the world of this story, where historical romance novelist Julia Kelly has delivered her most elegant effort yet, a deeply rewarding and moving novel. Did the idea begin for you within the pages of that diary?
I love found diaries and found letter books. I just think they're really interesting because diaries, often you get very personal, very introspective views of character, right? Things that they would never confess to anybody out loud, they might put into a diary. And so getting to use that as the framework for a mystery for the character in present day, because that's a dual timeline book, getting that chance to reveal that through diary entries that are not quite complete because the diarist is not writing a diary that's meant to be read by anybody else, right? So she knows what's going on, but we don't know what's going on. And the main character who's trying to figure this out doesn't know what's going on. So using that as a device, I think is both fun and narratively really fun to play with, but it also is a challenge in and of itself because you don't want somebody to sit down and necessarily write out every single thing that's going to ultimately reveal the mystery in the book. You need to leave some tension there. So how do you do that in a way that feels believable? And I think one of the things that I tried to do was to give some elements, but not all elements of what was going on in the story, action-wise.
Now, as the idea took flight, so too did Louise as a gunner girl, the little known but hugely important British anti-aircraft gun unit of the women's branch of the army, where they helped identify enemy planes during air raids, among other heroics. What a cool character to fly with here.
Very cool. Yeah. So there was this group of women called the Gunner Girls, and they were a part of the ATS, which was the Army's auxiliary service for women. They were attached to the Royal Artillery. Basically, they were called the ACAC Girls or the Gunner Girls, and they worked on the anti-aircraft guns. So they were right there on the top of rooftops in shelters. They were gunning down enemy aircraft over London, over Portsmouth, over pretty much anywhere you can think was a strategic site for in Britain. And then, of course, they also were sent abroad as well. And they were tight units, really well trained, well oiled machines. The women did absolutely everything except actually fire the gun. That was considered a combat. An entry into combat. So women weren't allowed to do that. They did all the calculations, all of the, setting fuses, spotting, measuring. And so I really wanted to get into sort of what it would have been like to work in one of these units, especially for a character who's been relatively isolated in her life, to then be working with 5 other women and to have this really close, really intense bond and friendship with them that, of course, also is in this place of extreme danger. I mean, they were being shot at, they were being bombed. These women were absolutely incredible, and there are, of course, war memorials to them as well, because there were some women who were lost too. So it's been fascinating learning about their story and getting emails from readers saying, my mother was an ACAT girl or was a gunner girl, and I had no idea, and now I'm going to go off and do this research about what she did during the war. It's really satisfying to kind of help somebody discover that about their own family history.
We look forward to bringing you Julia Kelly's full episode in an upcoming season on a streaming network, but for now we're excited to talk with her about her latest releases. Women's World will call The Lost English Girl a sweeping and beautifully written novel, where Viv Byrne is thrust into quite an odyssey of impossible choices that so many women her age had to make against the backdrop of World War II with their children, along with dealing with all sorts of internal family dynamics that complicate her life and love story with Joshua Levinson. What did you find most challenging about weaving together what the historical novel review raved was a well-paced, highly emotional, and excellent read, and with a satisfying ending, given all the complexities that work on the page here?
Liverpool's a place that's near and dear to my heart because it's where my mother's family's from. So she's from Liverpool. And although Viv is not based on any real person, she is the whole story is inspired by an actual thing that happened within the family. So generations ago, there was my relative, a young Catholic woman who ended up pregnant out of wedlock with a young Jewish man, and the families came together, and the couple was forced to marry in order to legitimize the child that was coming. But they were separated on the same day they were married, and they never saw each other again. And we don't know anything else about the story. We don't know how anybody felt about this, because the people involved have long since died, of course, and nobody talked about these things. So I wanted to write a story asking kind of the big what if, what if this had happened to somebody, and we got both answers to how she felt about it and how he felt about it, and what happened after that wedding day where they were separated. So that's really the inspiration for the story. And then, of course, being a fiction author means that I can just run with it, right? So I was able to just go and build out this story that has no resemblance to real life, but that seed of inspiration came from an old family story. I wanted to present this as, complicated people with complicated reasons for doing things. My hope is that although the readers may not agree with why the action has happened, Viv's family in particular is very traditional, and it really matters to them how they are perceived within their church, within their community, by their priest, all of these things. So they're very much driven by their faith as a reason for doing the things that they're doing. So although we may not agree with some of the things that they do, we can kind of understand why they're doing those things, because to them, that's what's really, really important. So my hope was that I could convey that through the characters, and then it sort of, works to make the story richer. I always think that, villains are never the best when they're, mustache twirling villains. They're the best when you can sit there and say, I completely disagree with what it is that you're saying, but I understand why you think that that's a good idea and why you think that what you're doing is justified. And the same on the other side, you have my character Joshua, his family is Jewish, and they take a more accepting route than Viv's family, but it takes them a long time to get there. So, it's sort of a story of two different families and two different approaches from two different characters to kind of getting to a point where they can reconcile themselves to the decisions they've made.
You've been at this a long time. For aspiring authors, using the romance between Josh and Viv here, what's key to making a long-term love affair interesting enough to follow over a long-term story arc like the one that lasts here throughout the novel?
I used to write romance novels, and the rule with those is, it has to end in happily ever after. And I wanted to tell a story where it wasn't a foregone conclusion that you were going to get a happily ever after. And in fact, I'd argue that you get something a little bit different than I think you would expect in a traditional romance novel with this book. And I wanted to, because this is sort of quote unquote historical fiction. I know we talked about how genres are shifting and changing, and historical is sort of this big umbrella term now. But that's one of the things I really love about writing historical novels, is that I can play with different elements of different genres. So I can, in one book really explore something along a more of a mystery line, or I can deal with friendship, or I can deal with romance as these sort of bigger themes that I'm tackling here. So in this case, I wanted to lay the groundwork of why these two people would have been attracted to each other, but then also ask a whole bunch of questions about, were they really meant to be together? What would have happened if they had been allowed to stay together? Was the relationship even a viable relationship? And, are they in fact better or worse off in their lives at the start of this book? And then, through the progression of following these characters by the end of the book as well. And without giving away too many spoilers, I think one of the joys as an author is getting to play around with that and getting to challenge both the characters' expectations, but also reader expectations of what you might want to happen at the beginning maybe is not what you want to happen to these people at the end of the book and where they end up ultimately.
Book reporter would muse at the last dance of the debutante that, like the frills of the debutante dresses or the frosting on the tiered cake carefully prepared by bakers to be cut with a sword at Queen Charlotte's ball, this novel will be savored and enjoyed. But there's a deeper plot at work here than usual, as Lily Nichols meets Lena Hartford and Catherine Norman. Did this novel begin with the idea of this final debutante ball before Queen Elizabeth in 1958, and did the girls begin dancing on the page from there?
It usually goes with an idea of something that I might want to write about. And then I kind of try to take a step back and say, okay, who are the people who I'm going to be writing about? What's the story I want to tell? And then I'll usually spin the plot out from there. So the two things kind of work hand in hand, but I like to have a bit of a sense of a theme and then build characters on that, kind of asking, who would this person be? Why would they think the way they think? How do they need to change and grow throughout the course of this novel? The book before The Lost English Girl was The Last Dance of the Debutante, and as you say, and what I thought was really interesting is I always like looking at periods of time where you have a huge amount of social change either happening right then and there, or, social disruption is coming. So 1958, we know that the swinging 60s are going to come up in London. We know that the sexual revolution is coming, education for women, wider job opportunities, the family dynamic is going to change. Just the whole world is going to shift in just a few years' time. And what I think is interesting about 1958 and the debutantes, although they're high society and although they are a very select, very privileged group of people, I think the fact that the palace, Buckingham Palace, decided that they were going to do away with debutante presentations, and 1958 was going to be the last year that they allowed debutantes to be presented at court, I think that's really kind of a harbinger of things to come. And it's the palace trying to usher in a sense of modernity, but the whole debutante tradition is rooted in tradition, and it's rooted in the fact that you couldn't be presented unless you were presented by a woman who had been presented. So your mother, your aunt, your grandmother. And so I think that's a really interesting thing to explore. What is it like being a young woman in this moment of change where it hasn't changed yet, but you can kind of see it coming and things are starting to change and open up, but we're not quite there yet. I can see certain scenes very clearly in front of me. I can see how they roll out. It's almost like watching a film, and then others not so much. So I think things that have that kind of more grand cinematic scope. So, the presentations themselves and all the women lined up with their dresses and, being presented between the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh. All of that felt very cinematic, but when it comes to sort of getting down into the dialogue and into the conversations between people, that's much more something that I kind of sit back and try to think, okay, how would these people speak to each other? What do I want to convey in this scene? And that's a little bit more of a, I don't know, for lack of a better term, an academic approach.
Now, as you continue to refine your expertise and craft as an author after doing this over so many years professionally, what do you feel like you have down just the way you like it and how you write these days, process-wise? And where do you still try to grow as an author with each new novel? Say using your latest A Traitor at Whitehall as an example.
With the work that I'm currently working on right now is I'm going through and I'm pulling out stuff that's just too much. I've given too much away too early on, and I'm either going to hold it in a file and I can weave it back in, or most often I've just overwritten because I've been trying to work my way through the story. So what I then do is kind of, once I get really, really clear on what it is that I want to say and what it is that I want to reveal and when I want to reveal it, that's a big thing as well. Kind of when's the big turning point in the book. Then I'll go through and I'll try to drop little hints through and see if I can figure out, am I giving away too much? Am I giving away not enough? Am I leading the reader without necessarily, hitting them over the head with, and this is where we're going, and this is what the mystery is going to be, and this is what the twist is. So that's what I'm trying to do. I am actually launching my first in a historical mystery series in October. So that is called A Traitor in Whitehall, and it's the first in the Evelyn Redfern series. It's set during World War II, amateur sleuth. She is a young woman who is recruited to be a typist in Churchill's cabinet war rooms. So sort of the center of the war effort and the war strategy during World War II was in this underground bunker under Whitehall. And of course, being a murder mystery, a murder happens, and she is the person who sort of launches into an investigation to try to figure out what happened, because she has a healthy amount of distrust for the military police who are taking on that investigation. So it's been an absolute blast to write, and I'm really looking forward to that getting into the hands of readers too. I think, again, talking about those moments of social change where lots of things opened up to people who didn't have opportunities before. I mean, that is the story of most women during World War II. Women were being asked to enter the workforce. They were being asked to do things that they had never been asked before. And they became a really, really vital part of winning the war, not just on the home front, but in all those auxiliary services and in the different ways that they were deployed. And so I think it's, as you've mentioned before, it can seem like a very male dominated time period because, a lot of people think war and they think combat and front lines, but there was this whole structure that was happening in order to allow that to go forward, and in order to allow the United States and Britain and the other allied forces to actually win the war. It's really fascinating to see sort of all the different ways that women filled those roles and then kind of were able to subvert some of the social conventions around what women should do and how they should behave. So I love writing about it. I think it's fascinating. And there's just so many stories to be told. As long as people will keep reading my books, I'll be very happy to keep writing them.
In that spirit, as you continue to add to your shelf in bookstores, libraries, and homes of your readers, what can they look forward to coming up on the horizon?
I'm writing another book that is hopefully going to be coming out in 2024, but I'm so early on in the process for that I probably can't. I've learned not to commit too much to what the story is about because things change in the editing process. But suffice it to say, it's another historical novel, which is exciting.
Julia, it has been both entertaining and educational talking today. Thanks so much for taking out time to be on About the Authors TV.
Thank you. I appreciate it too.